I never thought she would stand in a courtroom one day and pretend the money never existed. The divorce proceedings began on a Thursday morning in March. Judge Caroline Osei presided. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s with natural hair and the quiet authority of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not easily moved by any of them. My attorney was a man named Walter Kim. He looked like someone's favorite uncle. Slightly rumpled, always drinking from a paper coffee cup. Made you feel like things were going to be fine, even when they were not. Walter had told me one thing before we walked into that courtroom. He said, "Let them paint the picture first. Let them put every brushstroke on the canvas. Then we show the judge what they left out." Patricia Hale rose like she was late to receive an award. "Your Honor," she said, "this matter is fundamentally straightforward." She smiled the smile of someone who had already won. Attorneys who describe things as straightforward are telling you the most complicated part is the part they are not mentioning. Dr. Renee Garland built a business. She built a career. She built an organization that employs 38 people and serves patients in 3 states. She accomplished this through her own expertise, her own relationships, and her own relentless effort. She paused for effect. Thomas Garland contributed none of that. No professional skill relevant to the enterprise. No intellectual input. No labor. No strategy. She opened her folder and set a document on the table. "What Mr. Garland does have," she continued, "is a pattern of treating his wife's professional income as a personal resource. A documented history of positioning himself as essential to a business he had no hand in building." She was saying I was a leech. She was saying it with a pleasant tone and organized paperwork, but that was the word underneath all the other words. Leech. I looked at the table. I did not look at Renee. Walter had told me not to react. He said, "Whatever you feel, keep in your chest. The jury of this courtroom is one person, and she is watching both of you every second." I kept it in my chest. Patricia Hale went on for 40 minutes. She talked about Renee's professional development. She talked about the industry conferences Renee had attended. She talked about the speaking engagements and the referral network Renee had built through years of showing up and delivering results. All true, all accurate, all the story without the part that made the story possible. She did not mention the spare bedroom. She did not mention the $52,000 check. She did not mention the 17 other checks that followed it. She did not mention the nights I stayed up with Renee going over client proposals because she was too anxious to sleep and needed someone to tell her the numbers made sense. She did not mention any of that. When Patricia Hale finished, Judge Osei made a note and looked at Walter. Walter stood up and said, "Your Honor, the respondent reserves his full presentation for rebuttal." Patricia Hale looked up from her papers. That was not expected. Judge Osei looked at Walter with the expression of someone who has been on the bench long enough to recognize a person who knows exactly what they are doing. "Proceed," she said. And Walter sat back down. Patricia Hale looked at Renee. Renee looked at Patricia Hale. They did not look at me. I want to tell you about the night Renee got her first major hospital contract, because that night is important. It was a Tuesday in October, 7 years into the business. Our son Marcus was 9. Our daughter was 6. I had picked them both up from school, done homework with them at the kitchen table, made dinner, gotten them both bathed and into bed, and was sitting in the living room with my laptop going over some budget projections for work when my phone rang. It was Renee. She was crying so hard I could not understand her at first. When I figured out what she was saying, I put the phone down for a second and just sat there in the quiet house. Then I picked it back up and said, "I told you." She laughed through the crying and said, "You told me." It was the biggest contract the company had ever signed. It would triple their revenue. It would require her to hire 8 new people. It would mean 12-hour days for 6 months. I knew all of that. I also knew that I was going to be the one managing everything at home during those 6 months. The school runs, the doctor appointments, the homework, the dinners, all of it. And I was not angry about it, not even slightly, because that was what we had agreed to, even without ever saying it out loud. During those 6 months, I did not take a single work trip I was offered. I turned down a promotion that would have required more travel because Marcus was struggling in math and needed me home after school every day to work through it with him. I made that decision without telling Renee, because I did not want her to feel guilty during the most important stretch of her professional life. I just made it and moved on. That is what you do when you love someone. You absorb the cost without announcing it. Back in the courtroom, Patricia Hale had moved into what she clearly considered the most damaging part of her presentation. She introduced a financial summary that showed the assets. The company was valued at just over $4 million. There was a house. There were retirement accounts. There were 2 cars and a savings account. According to Patricia Hale's financial framework, everything of real value had been built by Renee, and my claim to any portion of it was the claim of a man who had simply been nearby while something great was happening. She did not say it exactly like that. She said it in lawyer language. But that was the meaning underneath the language. Thomas Garland was adjacent to success, not the source of it. Judge Osei was making notes with a pen that she clicked once every time she wrote something down. Click, note, click, note. I had been counting. Patricia Hale had prompted 17 clicks so far. I wondered what they meant. Walter had his paper coffee cup and was writing almost nothing. He glanced at me once. He gave me a very small nod. I gave him nothing back. I was keeping it in my chest. Now here is the part of the morning that required everything I had. Patricia Hale called Renee to offer testimony. Renee stood up in her cream-colored blazer, the one she wore to every important professional event, because she said it made her feel steady, and she walked to the front of the room and she said things that I had never heard her say before. She said she had always known she would build something significant. She said the business was the result of years of industry knowledge and client trust she had cultivated long before the company existed. She said the financial support during the early years was simply a household expense, the way any household expense gets covered in a marriage. Simply a household expense. $52,000. And the 17 checks after it. Simply a household expense. I looked at the wood paneling on the far wall. I was thinking about the Sunday afternoon with the color-coded folders. I was thinking about her shaking hands. I was thinking about the coffee she knocked off the table when she grabbed me after I said yes. I was thinking about how she cried. Renee did not cry easily. She was made from something harder than most people. When her tears came, they were real. That Sunday afternoon, they were real. I believed them. I still believe them, even sitting in that courtroom. That is the strange thing about a marriage ending this way. You do not stop believing in the person. You just stop believing they see you. Patricia Hale asked Renee directly, "Do you believe Thomas made any professional or intellectual contribution to your company?" Renee paused. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up and said no. Not in any way that would be recognized professionally. He was supportive in the way that spouses are supportive. But the business was mine. My knowledge. My effort. My relationships. Mine. Patricia Hale thanked her and Renee sat back down. The room was quiet. Judge Osei clicked her pen once. Walter leaned over to me and said quietly, "You ready?" I said yes. He stood. "Your Honor, the respondent would like to enter several exhibits into the record." Judge Osei nodded. Walter walked to the front and placed a series of documents on the clerk's table. Bank records. 12 years of bank records showing every transfer I had made to Renee Garland Solutions. Every lease payment I had guaranteed. Every payroll shortfall I had covered. Organized by date. Annotated by purpose. A total at the bottom that made Patricia Hale set her pen down. The total was $814,000. Over 12 years, I had put $814,000 into a company that was now valued at $4 million, with my wife claiming I had contributed nothing professionally. Walter let the number sit in the room for a moment. Then he said, "Your Honor, we also have correspondence. Emails between Mr. Garland and the company's first 3 clients. Emails in which Mr. Garland, using his professional expertise in financial operations, restructured the billing proposals that Dr. Garland had prepared, making them more favorable to the hospital clients and significantly more likely to be accepted." Patricia Hale looked at Renee. Renee was looking at the documents. Walter continued, 3 of the company's 11 current hospital contracts trace directly back to introductions Mr. Garland made through his professional network. We have the correspondence showing those introductions and the subsequent business development. Another set of documents went to the clerk's table. Judge Osei leaned forward slightly. She was reading something. Patricia Hale was writing on a notepad. Renee was very still. Walter then laid out the timeline of my career decisions alongside the company's growth. The promotion I turned down so I could be home for the children during Renee's expansion period. The travel I declined. The conference I skipped. He had obtained my personnel records through Discovery, and they documented everything I had walked away from professionally in order to be the stable ground that her ambition grew from. Patricia Hale objected twice. Judge Osei overruled her twice. The second overruling came with a look that said, "I'm going to hear all of this." Then Walter said, "Your Honor, the respondent has one more item he would like to enter into evidence." He picked up his phone. He looked at me. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a small digital recorder. Old technology. Something I had bought 10 years ago when I was doing financial audits and needed to document site visits. I had not planned to use it this way. But 3 years ago, during a period when things between Renee and me were already beginning to feel like a slow leak rather than a fast break, I had started keeping it in my shirt pocket on certain evenings. Not to catch her in anything. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I was afraid of losing things. Afraid of the version of events that might be told one day if things went wrong. I pressed play. The recording was from a Tuesday evening in November, 3 years before the divorce papers arrived. Renee had just returned from a week of client meetings in 2 different cities. She was tired in the way that feels like being emptied out. She came through the front door, and I had dinner ready, and the kids were already in bed, and the house was quiet. She sat down at the kitchen table and did not take off her coat for a long time. I remember watching her and not saying anything, because sometimes the most important thing you can do for a person is hold the silence still. After a while, she said, "Do you know what the hardest part of this week was?" I said, "Tell me." She said, "Sitting in those rooms with those administrators and knowing that none of it exists without you. Knowing that the reason I can be in those rooms is because you are home. Knowing that the reason the company survived those first 3 years is because you funded it when I had nothing but a folder full of color-coded guesses." She stopped. I waited. She said, "I think about that more than I say it. I know I do not say it enough. But I think about it every day, Thomas. Everything I have built, you made it possible. Every single bit of it. You are the reason any of it is real." The recording continued for a while after that. We talked about the kids. She asked about something Marcus had done at school that week. Normal Tuesday evening conversation. But those words sat in that courtroom like something solid. Like furniture. Like something you could put your hand on. The recording ended. Walter set the phone down. Patricia Hale was very still. Renee was looking directly at me for the first time since we had entered that room that morning. I did not look back. I was looking at the wall the way Walter had told me to. Judge Osei sat back in her chair. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the bench in front of her. She looked at Patricia Hale. Then she asked one question. She said, "Counsel, in your client's testimony this morning, she stated that Mr. Garland made no professional or intellectual contribution to the company. In light of the documents and the recording we have just heard, is your client prepared to revise that testimony?" Patricia Hale looked at Renee. Renee was looking at her hands. Patricia Hale said, "Your Honor, the petitioner may wish to reconsider certain characterizations." Certain characterizations. That was the moment. 12 years of funding. $814,000. A career's worth of decisions made in service of someone else's dream. And the best that Patricia Hale's $400 an hour could produce in that moment was, the petitioner may wish to reconsider certain characterizations. Judge Osei wrote something on her notepad. She clicked her pen. Then she looked at both tables and said, "We will take a 15-minute recess." I sat at the table. Walter got a fresh coffee from somewhere. I did not know where. He had a gift for producing coffee from thin air in difficult moments. My brother Dennis was in the gallery behind me. He had taken the day off work to be there and had spent the entire morning sitting very still in a way that I knew was costing him enormously because Dennis was not built for stillness. He was built for noise and motion and commentary. When the recess started, he leaned forward over the rail and said very quietly, "Tommy." I said, "Not yet, Dennis." He sat back. He understood. We had a shorthand, my brother and I, built over 43 years of being each other's first phone call in every kind of situation. He knew when to wait. During the recess, Patricia Hale and Renee sat with their heads together at their table for a long time. Renee's back was to me. She was very straight in her chair, the way she always sat when she was working through something difficult. I recognized the posture. I had seen it at our dining room table 100 times. I had brought her tea when she sat like that. I did not bring her anything now. I looked at the wood paneling. I thought about Marcus's baseball game. I thought about the faucet that was probably still dripping at home because I had never finished fixing it. When court resumed, Patricia Hale stood and said that her client was prepared to acknowledge that Mr. Garland's financial contributions to the business during its formative years were significant and that his professional network had facilitated certain early business relationships. She said this in a tone that suggested the words were being extracted from her one by one with a great deal of effort. Judge Osei nodded. She said, "Is the petitioner also prepared to acknowledge the professional expertise Mr. Garland brought to bear in his role as de facto financial advisor to the company during its early years?" Patricia Hale said, "We would characterize it differently." Judge Osei looked at her over her reading glasses. She said, "I'm sure you would, counsel." "That is not what I asked." There was a silence. Patricia Hale conferred with Renee. Then she said, "The petitioner acknowledges that Mr. Garland's professional background in financial operations informed certain early decisions in the company's development." Judge Osei wrote something down. She clicked her pen 4 times. I counted. I had been counting all morning. Walter glanced at me and gave me the same small nod he had given me hours earlier. I gave him nothing back. What happened next took until 4 in the afternoon to fully unfold. But I want to tell you about the moment that mattered most, the moment that was not in the courtroom at all. It happened in the hallway during the second recess, when Renee walked out and stood about 10 feet away from me and did not look directly at me for a moment, and then did. She looked like herself in a way she had not looked all day. Not the professional version, not the version from the business journal. Just Renee. The person who had shaking hands at the dining room table. The person who knocked coffee off the table when she was happy. "I'm not going to ask you to excuse any of this," she said. Why didn't there? How I describe things. She stopped, pressed her lips together. She said, "I told myself a story. I told myself that the idea was worth more than the investment. That vision is worth more than capital. That what you can build matters more than what someone gives you the tools to build it with." She stopped again. I did not fill the silence. That is what I do. I hold silences. I always have. She said I was wrong. About the story. And about how I told in there today. I said, "I know." She said, "The recording. I meant what I said on it." I said, "I know you did." She said, "Then why do you have it? Why were you keeping it?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because the day came when I was going to need someone to remember it for me," I said. She looked at me for a long time. One of those looks that has years in it. The kind of look that 2 people who build a life together can give each other even when the building is over. She said, "I'm going to tell Patricia that we need to talk about what a fair settlement actually looks like. I want to tell you what equitable recognition looked like in our case because it matters. It was not about punishment. I want to be clear about that. I did not walk into that courtroom to punish Renee. I walked in to make sure the truth had a place in the room. The settlement we reached, after 3 weeks of back and forth between the attorneys and 1 more hour in front of Judge Osei to formalize it, gave me a 35% stake in Renee Garland Solutions, valued at current market and structured as a buyout over 6 years at a fair interest rate. It gave me the house, which the kids needed for stability. It gave me an amendment to the company's founding records to reflect my role as original investor and financial advisor. That last piece was not legally required. Renee offered it. She said, "I want the record to be accurate. I want anyone who looks at how this company started to know how it actually started." I thought about the spare bedroom with the broken ceiling fan. I thought about the color-coded folders and the shaking hands and the coffee on the table. I said, "Thank you." She nodded. Patricia Hale looked like she was solving a math problem in her head that she did not enjoy solving. But she processed it professionally and moved on. When we went back before Judge Osei to formalize the agreement, she looked at both tables the way she had looked at us all day, with the particular calm of someone who has presided over enough of these to know that the paperwork is never the complete story. She reviewed the terms. She confirmed both parties understood and agreed. She asked if anyone had anything additional to say before she signed. Walter looked at me. I shook my head. Renee looked at Patricia Hale. Patricia Hale shook her head. Judge Osei nodded. She signed. Then she did something I had not expected. She set her pen down and looked at me directly. Mr. Garland, she said. I stood. She said, in a great many years on this bench, I have seen people in your position do a great many things with a moment like the one you had this morning. Most of them use it like a weapon. She tapped her pen on the bench once. You used it like a document. She tilted her head. I have not decided yet whether that reflects exceptional restraint or exceptional clarity of purpose. I said, Your Honor, in my experience those are usually the same thing. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Court adjourned at 4:37. The room emptied the way rooms empty after something real has happened, slowly and without much noise. Dennis materialized at my shoulder the way he always does, slightly too close, holding a granola bar he had produced from his coat pocket. He said, Thomas. I said, go ahead. He said, that was the most extraordinary thing I have ever been allowed to witness. He paused. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said more quietly, and I am sorry it had to happen. That was Dennis. Loud right up until the moment the loudness was wrong. I was putting my coat on in the lobby when I heard Renee behind me. Thomas. I turned around. She was standing near the elevator. Patricia Hale was somewhere behind her, giving the professional kind of space that attorneys give when they have been told to. Renee had taken her blazer off and was holding it over one arm. She looked tired in the particular way of someone who had spent a day hearing their own words used to describe them and had not enjoyed the description. She said, the kids. I said, I know. I will handle it. She said, they do not need to know any of this. I said, they will not hear it from me. She nodded. Then she said what you did in there. Staying quiet all morning. Letting it all build up before you said anything. That was either the hardest thing you have ever done or you were a very different person than I thought. I said, I have been doing the quiet version of things our whole marriage, Renee. You used to not always see it because quiet does not look like much from the outside. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, I see it now. I said, I know. That is usually how it works. She nodded once. The way you nod when something lands true and there is nothing to add. She said, for what it is worth, I'm going to make sure the people at the company know the real history. Not because the settlement requires it. Because it is right. I thought about the spare bedroom. I thought about the first check. I thought about $52,000 and the way her hands shook when she asked me to believe in her. I said, thank you, Renee. She said, you're welcome, Thomas. She turned and walked back toward the elevator. Halfway there she stopped, did not turn around, and said to the lobby wall, you held it all together. You always did. She did not wait for me to respond. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Dennis appeared next to me immediately, which meant he had been standing 6 feet away listening to all of it. He handed me the granola bar without a word. I took it. We walked out into the cold March afternoon, into the ordinary traffic and the pale early spring light, and I stood on the top step for one moment and thought about the faucet I still needed to fix. Then I thought about what Judge Osei had said, restraint or clarity of purpose. I still think she was right that they are the same thing. Because the reason I stayed quiet all morning was not strategy, not entirely. It was the same reason I had stayed quiet for 12 years while I signed checks and turned down promotions and sat at dining room tables going over proposals until midnight. I knew what I had built. I had always known. The only question was whether the truth would have a room to exist in. On that Thursday morning in March, it did. And that was enough. I want to tell you something about the months after. Because these stories always end in the courtroom, and life does not end in the courtroom. Life continues on the other side of it, quieter, more ordinary, harder in some ways, and easier in others. Marcus's baseball season started 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized. I went to every game. I sat in the bleachers with a thermos of coffee and cheered too loudly at the right moments and said nothing at the wrong ones. My daughter Lily started asking me to read to her again at bedtime, which she had stopped doing at age 7 because she said she was too old, and which apparently she had changed her mind about at age 12. I fixed the faucet. It took about 20 minutes once I actually finished it. I do not know why I let it drip for 3 weeks. Some things are like that. You know how to fix them. You just need the right morning. The house felt different without Renee in it. Not worse exactly. Different. Quieter in the ways that are actually quiet and louder in the ways that matter. I could hear the kids better. I was more present in the particular way that presence becomes possible when you're not managing the gap between two people who have stopped understanding each other. Renee and I have found a functional version of being the parents of 2 children together without being married. It is not warm. It is not unfriendly. It is the kind of relationship that exists in the space where something bigger used to be. We are polite. We are cooperative. We do not pretend it is anything other than what it is. Marcus told me once that he thought we were better at it than some of his friends' parents who were still married. I did not know exactly what to do with that observation, so I just thanked him and asked him if he wanted more cereal. The company amendment came through 4 months after the settlement. Renee sent me a copy. The founding documents of Renee Garland Solutions now reflect, in the official record, that Thomas Garland served as original investor and founding financial advisor to the company from its inception. It is 2 sentences in a legal document. I read those 2 sentences more times than I will admit. Not because I needed the credit. I had always known. But because there is something about having the true version of a story exist somewhere permanent. Something about knowing that the record is accurate. That if Marcus or Lily ever looked it up one day, they would find the real thing. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to be angry on my behalf. I am past the part where I need that. I am telling you this story because I think a lot of people are out there doing the quiet version of things. The version that does not make it into the profile in the business journal. The foundation work. The financial bridges. The career decisions made in the dark that no one ever sees. The Tuesday evenings holding someone else's anxiety steady until they can sleep. I think those people deserve to know that the truth has weight. That documents exist. That recordings exist. That a room full of paperwork can tell the real story when the people inside the room have started telling a different one. If you are the foundation, you are not invisible. You're just load-bearing. There's a difference. Walls get painted and admired. Foundations hold everything up quietly underneath. Both things are necessary. Both things are real. The building does not exist without either one. Dennis called me the evening after the verdict to check on me. I told him I was okay. He said, "Are you actually okay, or are you doing the Thomas thing where you say you are okay and then you're quiet about it for 6 months?" I said, "Ask me in a year." He said, "I will put it in my calendar." He did. He actually called me 1 year later, almost to the day. I told him I was okay. I meant it. I did not know if what I did in that courtroom was discipline or wisdom or just the particular stubbornness of a man who had spent 17 years learning that the quietest version of himself was usually the truest one. But I built something. I know that with certainty. I built the ground that something great grew from. And in a courthouse hallway, with a blazer over one arm and tired eyes and a voice that still sounded like the person I had married, Renee Garland finally said so. That was enough. It was not everything, but it was enough. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe to Daddy's Revenge for more real, raw, and honest stories about the moments that matter. Thank you for being here.